podcast finally back after a week plus a long hiatus, live at youtube.com/Paul Gallant and twitch.tv/Gallant says. I'm trying to do this at a different time of the day. I've found that when I do this show right after I do my own radio show, I feel gassed. I don't feel like I've put in the kind of prep that I want. So we're shaking things up a bit, trying a couple of different new times. I think I'm probably going to settle on 6 p.m. Central Time most weeknights, and we might start doing late Sunday night episodes because I've also found that when we do the episodes on Friday, there just aren't a lot of people there. And to be perfectly honest, I want to dive into my weekend. Anyway, on today's show, we're going to talk about Geno Smith getting paid, why none of you should have had your mind changed by the NFL Combine, and a politics question. It's weird that ageism is a one-way street in Congress, right? I'll explain. First, though, here's the intro.
A radio show host in Seattle called Paul Gallant.
You are definitely living in the hindsight world today, Paul.
Do you feel there's been a consistent theme with the interceptions?
I think every interception really has a different story.
I was just kind of curious what Paul gets to see.
You got f***ing grow, mother. Are you kidding me?
Paul Gallant, what the hell is wrong with you?
You might have remembered this from week 1 of this past NFL season. The Seattle Seahawks took down Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos at Lumen Field, and it was Geno Smith, under center for Seattle, looking awesome in the first half of that game. It's something that for the most part this past year, he was, at least compared to the actual expectations you have. But this clip went viral as he did a post-game interview.
The folks you said had written you off, maybe? What did Smith say to them?
Yeah, they wrote me off. I ain't right back, though. That's the problem. I ain't right back. Let's go.
All right. Congratulations, Geno.
Thank you.
Joe.
They wrote me off, and I didn't write back.
A radio show host in Seattle called Paul Gallant.
You are definitely living in the...
I got to say, good line. Good line there.
We have breaking news coming into Sports Center.
Goodness gracious. Still trying to figure out the whole technical side of things on this thing. It was a good line, right? So here are the details today. Geno Smith got a new contract with the Seattle Seahawks. The eve of the deadline for NFL teams to give players the franchise tag. He gets, per Jordan Schultz, and we'll get to that tweet by Jordan Schultz that broke the news in a moment, a 3-year contract extension worth $105 million, with the ability to earn $52 million in the first calendar year. At face value. This year was a pleasant surprise for Geno Smith. But did he play well enough to merit a 3-year commitment? So it makes me want to actually see the details of this contract. And we don't have the details right now. Jordan Schultz didn't really get all that much. You might have seen this tweet from Jordan Schultz at Schultz Report on Twitter. Breaking: Geno Smith and the Seahawks are finalizing a 3-year contract extension worth $105 million with the ability to earn $52 million in the first calendar year. Smith earned Comeback Player of the Year and Pro Bowl honors after leading the NFL in completion percentage. I'll be honest, completion percentage doesn't traditionally impress me that much. Sam Bradford's a guy who also often led the NFL in completion percentage. But Geno Smith had a couple of games this past season where there was absolutely no denying that he really fit into what the Seahawks wanted to do offensively, and maybe did so in a way that whatever version of Russell Wilson is still on the field now in Denver, couldn't do anymore. But did the season you just watched with Geno Smith convince you that this is going to continue to work? He's a 32-year-old quarterback who just had his career best season. And there's tons of circumstances that Geno Smith was either in control of or outside of his control, if you really want to be a stand for Geno, that perhaps prevented him from showing what he could be previously. To be perfectly honest, there were a lot of stories about him being a dick when he was playing for the New York Jets. Doesn't seem like his personality is that far off from it based off of the DUI that nobody talks about from earlier this year, where he was threatening to, I think, get cops fired, kick their ass, blah, blah, blah. But he gets an opportunity for a full season, unlike last year where he plays for a little bit of time, surprisingly plays well, until Russell Wilson all of a sudden, after rehabbing his hand for 20 hours a day, decides I'm going to go back out on the field. He didn't look particularly good when he returned to the field. What are the actual guaranteed dollars in this contract, though? Because NFL contract reporting is generally a reporter blowing an agent. Yes, that's graphic, but yes, that's accurate. He has the ability to earn $52 million in the first calendar year. Okay, well, give me a little bit more than that, right? And it's weird that Adam Schefter essentially co-opted Jordan Schultz's tweet saying this: Seahawks and Pro Bowl quarterback Geno Smith reached agreement on a 3-year, $105 million contract, including $52 million in the first year, as Schultz reported. But hang on, you would think that Schefter is going to actually get when the guaranteed money's for. And this does confirm what I think was probably the smart play for the Seahawks to do with Geno Smith, is that this is a contract that is likely close to a 1-year contract. They are making good by Geno. They are rewarding him for the year he just had. They're not just slapping him with the franchise tag. They're giving him the potential for more years, but they're also giving themselves an escape, which they should. Because again, Geno Smith's had one successful season as a starter. Losing Dave Canales, who leaves as the quarterback coach to go with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, could be a big loss. I think a very fair comparison for Geno Smith at this moment in time is Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill's career looked like it was done when he was in Miami, but he goes to Tennessee with Marcus Mariota still as the starting quarterback, and I wasn't the biggest Marcus Mariota fan. I had a feeling that maybe he would have the plug pulled on him midseason. He does, and Tannehill played great. He really did. Arthur Smith was his offensive coordinator then. Arthur Smith's with him for a little bit of time, but then he goes on to the Atlanta Falcons to become their head coach. And ever since he's been gone, Tannehill has come back to earth. He's an above-average quarterback, Tannehill has, for the majority of his career. When it comes to being a starter, he's been an above-average quarterback. And Geno Smith for this year was an above-average quarterback. Is an above-average quarterback worth committing to for more than just 1 year? I say no. Honestly, I would have done the franchise tag if I could have here. There is a way that I could look at this contract, and maybe there are more guaranteed monies that would keep Geno Smith with the Seahawks for more than just one season, for a couple of seasons. Maybe the Seahawks are thinking about drafting a quarterback with that 5th overall pick, and they should. They really should. Because, again, this is a guy that last year definitely had some brilliant moments, but let's take a look at the game log, because there were some duds, especially down the stretch. So he has a couple of really awesome games. November 27th against the Vegas Raiders, that overtime game where Josh Jacobs has the touchdown run up the middle. He throws 27 of 37 for 328 yards against a not very good Raiders defense. 73% completion percentage with 2 touchdowns. He's averaging 8.9 yards an attempt. It's like the games that he had earlier in the year against Detroit and New Orleans, where he was averaging 10.7 yards an attempt, and people were legitimately putting him in the MVP conversation. After that game against Vegas, against the Los Angeles Rams on the 4th of December, again, 28 of 39 for 369 yards, 3 touchdowns, a 71.8% completion percentage. And look, I'll admit, I didn't watch a lot of these games as closely as I would have liked to. I saw the highlights, I saw the statistics, I saw Seahawks Twitter talking about Geno Smith. being excited, but also complaining about the offensive line. Seems like the Seahawks tackle situation has resolved itself, but much like the situation I'm covering on a daily basis here in Houston, the interior offensive line wasn't very good. Geno Smith got sacked a lot this season, 46 times. You thought Russ got sacked a lot? Geno got sacked just about as many times as Russ did. The curse of the Seahawks always giving up 40-plus sacks, it continued, even with a quarterback who was probably more willing to play within the confines of an offense. And you can blame the struggles down the stretch on the lack of an offensive line if you really want to. But I think it's noteworthy to take a look at his statistics from December 11th on. Against the Panthers, he's 21 of 36 and a 30-24 loss for 264 yards, 3 touchdowns. He throws 2 interceptions. Then you might have seen that Thursday game against the San Francisco 49ers where San Francisco beat them 21-13. He was 31 of 44 for 238 yards, an average of 5.4 yards per completion. No interceptions, but he could have thrown a lot of interceptions in that game. San Francisco's got a great defense, right? So, okay, maybe we don't hold that against him too much. But the very next week against the Kansas City Chiefs, who don't have that good of a defense, 25 of 40 for 215 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. They do beat the Jets the second to last game of the year, but Geno Smith goes 18-29 for 183 yards. He's averaging 6.3 yards a completion. And they win the last game of the year against the Los Angeles Rams 19-16, where Geno Smith doesn't look that great for the majority of the game. And then, of course, in the 49ers game, he had, I thought, a stellar first half, but in the second half, things started to get very difficult for him. Does Geno Smith feel like a quarterback that this version of the Seahawks are going to get past the first round of the playoffs or even the second round of the playoffs? No. It's that simple. And that's why when you look at this contract, I want to know the final details on it, and we haven't gotten the final details on it. We're seeing a report of what the contract actually is, but are we really getting a true feel for how many years the Seahawks plan to commit to him? And it has me thinking about this coming NFL draft. Anthony Richardson stole the show at the NFL Combine this weekend. Anthony Richardson seems like the kind of quarterback that John Schneider, having been interested in the past in Josh Allen, in Patrick Mahomes, would be interested in. Right? I mean, he's got all the physical traits that you would like. You don't have to throw him right out there. I think right now, there's no way in hell he's getting past the middle of the first round after blowing the doors off of pretty much every single athletic statistic he could at the Combine, and he deserves a lot of credit for it. I think Seattle would be a great fit for him. I really do. And yeah, maybe that puts some pressure on Geno Smith, but do you really, as a Seahawks fan, if you're watching this right now or you're listening to it, do you really want to roll with Geno Smith for the foreseeable future? I don't think you do, and I don't think you should. He's above average. You don't want to settle for an above average quarterback in today's NFL. You just don't. Can that above average quarterback get better? Yeah, but I think that's a conversation you can have when somebody's in their 20s. We're seeing it with Jalen Hurts right now. But Jalen Hurts also has some ridiculous physical traits of his own and a really good supporting cast in Philadelphia, a better supporting cast than the Seahawks have. The Eagles have one of the best offensive lines in the National Football League. You could also take a look at Josh Allen, and maybe you try to talk yourself into that. But again, that's not what you're getting with Geno Smith. You're getting a guy who was thought to have a lot of talent going into his draft class way back in the day, a guy who has created some of his own misfortune. He could have been the starting quarterback for the New York Jets for what, the 2015 season? Gets punched in the face by IK and Empali, and Ryan Fitzpatrick takes over. The rest is history. The Jets actually have a good year. That could have been Geno Smith, and maybe that changes his career forever. That's something he's going to have to think about for a while, but guess what? He just got paid, so I don't think he fucking cares that much. I'm sure whatever the Seahawks gave him is something that does reward him for the season that he just had, for stepping in for Russell Wilson the year before. And I'm not trying to shit on Geno Smith here either. I'm just saying that if you are committing to Geno Smith for 3 years, you're making a mistake. I don't think the Seahawks are doing that, and I'm kind of frustrated that Jordan Schultz and Adam Schefter are putting out this report that essentially blows whatever agent got the deal done for Geno Smith. And guess what? Good for that agent, too. He's getting paid. It's great that he was able to get a multi-year contract for Geno Smith, who I figured should have only gotten the franchise tag, nothing more. Good for all parties involved. And I know I'm going to sound like a hater or something like that. But when I look at Geno Smith, I look at a guy who is a temporary stopgap. I think the Seahawks can do better. I think that any Seahawk fan knows it. Don't settle for a quarterback. Is he as good as Matt Hasselbeck? Just ask yourself that question. Is he that good? I don't think he is. He's definitely not Russell Wilson. Maybe now at this point in Russell Wilson's career, maybe he's on the same level, but I think that Geno Smith, long-term, isn't the answer for the Seahawks. I think we all know it, and I'm hoping that this is a two-part move for Seattle where John Schneider decides to take a flyer on someone like Anthony Richardson in the draft. Something else I wanted to talk about, because I could not handle the online discourse that happened after the NFL Combine this weekend. Speaking of Anthony Richardson, do the people that digested the NFL Combine like it's Viagra still have pants tense? And we will transition into talking about the NFL Combine. Guys, none of your minds should have been changed by what you saw at the NFL Combine. Nothing you saw there should have made you feel any differently about any of the quarterback prospects there. First off, let's talk about the short man, Bryce Young. He's 5'10" and 1/8. He's 205 pounds, so that's nice. Amazingly, that's actually the size that Russell Wilson, who is huskier and stockier now at this point in his career, was when he weighed in at the NFL Combine. I was surprised by that. I figured Russ weighed more than that. And maybe that's some water weight. Maybe that's Bryce Young eating just a shit ton of bread in the build up to the NFL Combine. But seeing that Russell Wilson's frame has actually increased over time to 215 pounds, to 225 pounds at one point, it does give me hope for the, I think, biggest concern with Bryce Young. His frame, his height, it's not ideal. It might lead to issues with him staying in the pocket, though he has pretty damn good pocket presence considering his height. I think the thing, though, that with Bryce Young that you need to remember is that he was the best quarterback in college football last year. Period. That's simple. Does the NFL Combine make you think differently about what you saw this past year? It shouldn't. It really shouldn't. And there's a lot of people out there that have had their opinion changed by the events of this weekend. Guys, watch highlights of Bryce Young against Texas. I saw that game live. Holy fuck. And that was going up against a very good Texas defensive front behind an offensive line for Alabama that wasn't that good. Young is the most consistent player at quarterback in college football. He's proven it over the last 2 years. CJ Stroud threw. Daniel Jeremiah said it's one of the best throwing sessions you've ever seen. We shouldn't make too much out of throwing sessions of guys in shorts, especially when there's no pass rush. We shouldn't. But he apparently looked very good. And I think all of a sudden Stroud's been forgotten this weekend because he didn't run a 40-yard dash. He didn't do the other things that could have potentially put him in the same conversation as Anthony Richardson. Will Levis from Kentucky, who's also probably a borderline first-round quarterback prospect who has a cannon for an arm, as he will tell you. He didn't do any of that stuff either. So a lot of the things we already knew about these quarterbacks were somewhat confirmed, or those opinions weren't changed this past weekend, if you're rational. And then we saw Anthony Richardson run a 4.43 40, set the broad jump record, set the vertical jump record for a quarterback, and everyone collectively lost their fucking minds. And that, to me, is understandable to an extent. If you're someone who likes to watch the NFL Combine, God fucking help you. But if you do like to spend your weekend watching not actual football, a bunch of guys running around in shorts and stuff, bless your heart, number one. And number two, you are going to see exactly what you already knew. Anthony Richardson is really athletic. I watch Anthony Richardson often. I am a Florida Gator fan. Did I watch every game this past year? No. Did I watch enough games this past year? Yes. Richardson was a lot of fun. It was a great experience. He made some incredible plays over the course of his time with the Gators. He's also maddeningly inconsistent, and it's going to take him some time to become a consistent player. But the guy's fast, that's for sure. He's strong. He's creative. There's a lot of things to like. But we knew this already. And the NFL Combine has some people thinking maybe Richardson should be going first overall. Look, the big concern I have with Bryce Young is his size. And that if he goes in a situation where there's a bad interior offensive line in front of him, he's either going to, one, get his fucking lights knocked out every single game, or two, worse, he's going to develop bad habits as he's consistently running away from defensive tackles who are breathing down his neck. You don't want either of those things, right? So those are some legitimate concerns to have for, say, the Houston Texans situation with Bryce Young. But he's still the quarterback who has been the best in college football over the last 2 years. And a weekend that did not involve any actual games shouldn't change that. Being reminded or really highlighted as to how athletic Anthony Richardson can be, illuminated, great. Like, that's good for Anthony Richardson. He earned himself a shit ton of cash this weekend. Like, I don't think there's any way he falls out of the first round right now, and I would imagine there's a very low chance of him falling out of the top 10. Some team's going to trade up for him. And if he finds himself in a good situation, like as I've said before, Seattle, great, awesome. He gets to sit behind Geno Smith for a year, maybe a couple of years. He finally comes in, and you're hoping that he's going to be awesome. There's no pressure on him. He's going to be working with, I think, one of the best coaches in the NFL, and Pete Carroll. Should have been a Coach of the Year nominee based off of what they were able to cobble together this past season. I'd love to see that. And I hope that Geno Smith won't have any hurt feelings about it, and that he acts as a veteran mentor. Maybe he'll be that. I honestly don't know. He also might be competitive. He just got paid a shit ton of money because of the year he just played. So all I want to say about the NFL Combine this past weekend is that no one's mind should have been changed by it. You should still feel the same way that you felt about all these quarterbacks going into it. And that includes C.J. Stroud, who has somehow been forgotten. Are we really vaulting Anthony Richardson past C.J. Stroud when it comes to the quarterbacks in this year's draft? That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. Look, C.J. Stroud didn't play well against Michigan, but did he not look fucking awesome in the college football playoff? He was great. Don't forget about that. He had a great game. And that's one of the biggest stages there is. It's weird. He's sort of fallen through the cracks because of a weekend by a guy who was maddeningly inconsistent in college. And the games should matter more than the workouts. I don't even want to watch any of the fucking pro days that are going to happen in the next couple of weeks. There will be more bullshit that comes out of them. Like, remember with Zach Wilson, he made like one good throw and everyone was losing their shit over him. He gets drafted in New York. He's a guy who went to BYU. There was no way that was going to work out. Sorry to anyone from Utah, but the culture shock of going from there to a loser organization that has a rabid fan base that gets angry quickly, the odds of him working out there were close to none. He needs to go somewhere else. The Jets, I think, know that too. They should shop him around. Maybe you get something in return for him, but he can't continue his career in New York. But people got crazy over his workouts, his pro day. Same thing with Johnny Manziel, who had some fucker running him around and chasing with a broom. Great, awesome. Who gives a fuck? It's all about what they did on Saturdays. Now, I'll admit I'm not some film junkie that studies all this shit and knows what is what. But, and I feel like more people online, by the way, should be that way. Like, I don't know who's going to be the best quarterback coming out of this year's draft class. I just know who was the best quarterback in college football this past year. It was Bryce Young. Then it was C.J. Stroud. It was not Anthony Richardson. It was not Will Levis. A couple of comments. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. I think the combination of Bobby, the Legion of Boom, and Russ, Marshawn Lynch, Doug Baldwin was good for the team's growth. Would be cool to see the offense and defense grow together again. Is this really the draft for that? That's an interesting question. I'm assuming that means taking a look at the quarterback, Ryan, and adding a guy like Anthony Richardson or an interior offensive lineman. I feel like given the receiver core that the Seahawks have, where I still think you want to see what you got in D.S. Cridge, I'll be honest, it doesn't seem like that's going anywhere, a former second-round pick. but you definitely have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, one of the best 1-2 wide receiver combinations in the NFL. Kenneth Walker III had a really good season this past year, so you have a pretty good running back behind him. It's really all about the offensive line on the interior. You could potentially find a great offensive lineman there, but I feel like if you've got that fifth spot and there's a quarterback that looks the way that Richardson did, I don't think you can say no there unless somebody's offering a really shit ton of money. Ryan continues saying Geno feels like he vibes with this core. Yeah, I think he does. I think especially in the wake of Russell Wilson, I think they like that there's a guy who's more in the locker room than Russ was and actually seems to be rank and file instead of sort of separating himself from the rank and file. I think this core's got plenty of time. I feel like the Seahawks really successfully pressed the reset button. And to have the year that they had last year where they make the playoffs, you didn't really have any expectations for them going into the playoffs. But they were playing with house money all year long. And, I mean, with the offensive linemen, finding Tariq Woolen, the young tackles that they had, I think there's a very big window for this team. Really, my big question is how much longer is Pete Carroll going to want to do it? And I imagine he's been reinvigorated by this past season that he had. And you can understand why the Seahawks maybe rewarded Geno Smith because they felt reinvigorated by a guy who was much more willing to play within a system. He deserves a lot of credit for that. And I don't want anyone to come away from this little episode thinking to themselves, Paul thinks Geno Smith's fucking terrible. I don't. But Geno Smith does have limitations. I think we all got to be honest about that. While I'm being an old man acting, I'll get off my lawn about the NFL. Why do the olds have such power in our government? Wow, what a transition, Paul. Look, I do want to talk about politics when I get to the end of these shows. And I found this clip interesting. And this is, I think, something that should be a
Nikki Haley
bipartisan take. This is an interview that Jill Biden, the First Lady of the United States, did with some CNN reporter. I'll be perfectly honest. I don't know who. But this jumped up on my timeline today, and it made me think of a strange hypocrisy that we do have in Congress.
Nikki Haley, one of the Republican candidates, is calling for mental competency tests for those politicians over the age of 75. What do you think about that?
Ridiculous.
Would your husband ever take one of those?
I mean, we would never even discuss something like that.
So she's going to defend her husband. I don't blame her. It's a pretty, deep question. I'll give the interviewer credit for actually having the balls to ask that to the First Lady. Ageism is something that exists in many aspects, right? Older people look at young people and they're like, shut the fuck up, Gen Z. And Gen Z people look at older people and they're like, y'all are mid for real, on God. There is this obviously massive chasm that we have between generations. But I think that for the most part, ageism, when it comes to decisions that matter, is held against young people. And maybe I'm a little bit biased here. But why can't it be held against older elected officials? I've seen this tweet make the rounds today, that little interview clip that you just heard. And there are some people that are claiming that CNN was being ageist there. But ageism, weirdly, in politics is a one-way street, is it not? We have minimum ages for presidents, 35. We have minimum ages for people in Congress. You got to be 30 to be in the Senate. You got to be 25 to be in the House of Representatives. We don't have maximum ages, though. That seems inconsistent, doesn't it? It's weird. You would think that as people get older and older and older, that those older people are maybe reflecting less of their constituents than they even realize. So take a look at Congress today. I am only older than 4 U.S. reps. Greg Kasar in Texas, Anna Paulina Luna in Florida, AOC, they're all 33, and one other, Maxwell Alejandro Frost from Florida, who was 25 years old. And that's interesting because if you take a look at the age of the 118th Congress, it's a lot older than that. The average age of the 118th Congress, and this is per fiscalnote.com, is 58 years old, dropping 3 years from the previous Congress. So it was 61. Overall, members of Congress seem to be getting younger, though their average age is much higher than the median age of 38.8 in the United States. So a lot of people that are representing us are way older than us. And then take a look at the average age of a senator, 64. The average age of someone in the House, 57. Does that make sense? And maybe that question that the CNN reporter asked was unfair. But to go a little bit further, we all know people who are older and all of a sudden their mental faculties start to go, right? It's sad. It's depressing. And I am not looking forward to something that I think I will actually end up going through someday. That. I think it's going to happen to me. But when you get up there in age, you start to lose it a little bit. And I think we can all agree, this is a bipartisan take, that Joe Biden, 80 years old, 46th president of the United States, is not throwing his fastball anymore. He's 80. Forget about the politics. When you see him talk, he just doesn't seem like he has it. So that question I don't think is unfair. And I'm not making an accusation here about Joe Biden, but I saw another interesting statistic at the Alzheimer's Organization of America website. The number of Americans living with Alzheimer's is growing and growing fast. More than 6 million Americans of all ages have Alzheimer's. An estimated 6.5 million Americans aged 65 and older are living with Alzheimer's in 2022. 73% are age 75 or older. About 1 in 9 people aged 65 and older, 10.7%, has Alzheimer's. Well, let's just think about the average age of a senator, 64 years. There's 100 senators. Is it possible that some of them maybe are operating with some form of it? And is it that crazy, considering we have minimum age limits in Congress, to ask members of Congress or the president or some other elected official to take some sort of mental competency test? Especially when you're talking about the latter details where of the 6.5 million Americans living with Alzheimer's, 73% of that 6.5 are 75 or older. There's a lot of senators in their 70s. I'm just throwing the question out there. I saw that video and I did just think to myself, well, we have minimum age limits for all these elected officials. Why don't we have a maximum age limit? Anyway, that's going to wrap up today's Gallant Says podcast. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. You can listen to it. You can also watch it. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant or Twitch.tv/Gallant Says. We're still trying to figure out a live time to do this, but 6 p.m. Central Time is probably the time we're going to do it for the most part. I do have a couple of engagements this week. I got an HOA meeting on Wednesday. I'm looking forward to that fucking thing. But you can, if you have a question for the show, email me at gallantsays@gmail.com or get after me at gallantsays on Twitter, on Instagram, or on TikTok if you ever have a question. Frontrunner says, Paul, you on here talking to yourself? You're goddamn right I am. So long, farewell, have yourself.